I keep talking about Coltrane, but there's a song that if people are not crazy about jazz and they want to hear this idea, and you can hear it on the piano as well, there's a tune called Spiritual. It was recorded live at the Village Vanguard by John Coltrane. And on that song, there's a couple of interesting things. First of all, you can tell that it's a story that's being told by somebody telling a story. I mean, the saxophone is telling a story. You listen to it, it's talking. It's not talking in a corny way like honky tonk, whatever the British guy with the TV show. It's not that. Yakety sax. It isn't yakety sax. It's talking in a very spiritual and gospel-y way. And then Paul Lagos, when we were listening to this, the piano solo starts with the McCoy Tyner. He says, listen to the church bells. You listen to this music, and these guys are, whether they knew what they were doing or not on that level, there's these images that come out, just like Jimi Hendrix, by the way. Jimi Hendrix was painting a picture with a lot of this stuff, and this is what music's about, and at that point, you don't call it jazz, because Hendrix was jazz in a certain way, too, very much. Especially his solo, when he did things like Little Wing, the intro to Little Wing, things like that. That's totally jazz to me. I'm going off in all these different... when you were just a young kid, when you would walk into a record store or a hardware store, they just would have all the vinyl there. It wasn't like segregated into different idioms. Was it? Now you're asking me to remember back so far that I'm trying to
Come on.
We had radio and
right.
To some extent TV, but it's true that we didn't just go online and download stuff.
No, but I'm even talking about the idea like going
when you
in...
went.
Yeah.
When you went, you know what? I'm not sure I bought records because the way I moved around, I probably didn't actually have a record collection. So tapes, it was probably divided into jazz and, of course, top 40 stuff and what you heard on the AM radio at night.
Well, and that's the other thing that I think that's one thing I've talked to a lot of cats about, the idea of the freeform radio. It was absolutely pivotal where you would have these stations going from Rochester, New York on a clear night all the way down to Delaware, and
right.
Some cat Harry Abrams would come on and from midnight to 6 in the morning and say, yeah, we're just going to play 6 hours of Monk now. We'll see you later. I mean, it's like the mind expansion, the palate expansion of people. You would hear Cannonball, Ray Charles, Peter Paul, Mary, and all in a half hour on the same station. And to me, that was huge. And just sort of under the like you said, the fusing of gospel, the blues coming out of the church. I hate using idioms. I just feel like idioms have crippled music because you don't get that sly stoner funk feel that you got with Lagos and Resnick and Mandel. It's not. I mean, maybe it's there, and I just can't see it or hear it because the media. We have a supply and demand issue, but we're all over the place. And yeah, go ahead.
There's a few. It's funny, and I mean, this could be a 10-hour discussion.
It will be.
But there's always been things and ways to get the expression out. But it's true that when I was in the 60s, for example, I was in high school in the 60s, and in the 1960s, you had AM radio and we had FM radio, and there were a few stations on one end or the other of the dial that might have played a lot more esoteric. Remember, there's no NPR or anything like that. But that eventually came maybe in the 70s even, perhaps. And at that point, you had... there used to be a show called Morning Becomes Eclectic, I think. Maybe, for all I know, that's still on. But that was one of those stations that played a little of everything. And they would just go on, they would have all kinds of jazz. They probably had even free jazz and all that. In the bigger cities like Los Angeles, when I was living in Los Angeles in the late 60s and early 70s, there was everything. I mean, there were stations. There was not that much country western, actually. You have to drive up to Bakersfield for that. There was probably one station. But there were stations that played jazz. But we used to mock the ads.
Right.
Like there was one from the motel playing discreet off-street parking. That was the jazz station.
Right.
K-Jazz or something. Anyway, you have that. And if you zoom forward to today, what's really interesting is that what we call the long tail, which is this little like you might have been interested in Kaleidoscope, a band that Lagos was in. You can go online and find that somewhere.
I have the vinyl copy of that.
Yeah,
listen. Lagos was on, like, he's playing like these like folk trio gigs. This folk trio album with Leo Kottke. It's ridiculous. The guy. Yeah. But okay. Let's get back to Randy Resnick here. Early 70s. You were tell me. Here's the other thing about the culture. The music was out in the street. I mean, you could go to Griffith Park and there was drum circles. You could go to African clubs to see, African music. You could go. It was out there. Timbales, congas. The music was out in the street. You look now, a lot of culture's been stifled in our country, or jazz, or whatever you want to say. Like, this music has been turned into sort of like a wine and cheese kind of thing. But it was so visceral. It was in your ear all the time. And I'm just trying to figure out. Tell me about some of the first gigs. Even if you get paid $5 a night, talk about some of the gigs you were on, and maybe some of the cats that you wound up playing with who were coming from a session or their gig and they came into your gig. I mean, talk about some of those early imprints on your career.
I can tie that in with the story of the Pure Food and Drug Act and sugarcane, and then we can tie that knot. First of all, when I came out to L.A., I know you spoke to Taj Mahal recently, right? Or I don't know how recently.
I did, yeah.
You have an interview with him. And Taj was playing at the Whiskey. When I first moved out to California, the Whiskey Go-Go was in its heyday. And you had acts, all kinds of stuff was playing there. And Taj was playing there with Jesse Ed Davis, who was a really... So, I don't know, that's a bar, really. And you went in there and Taj... was playing, and it was great. And then I just walked up, and Jesse got off the stage, and I walked up and said, "Man, you sound great. You sound beautiful, man." First of all, people talk to each other in those days. Now, it would be harder to do that. But anyway, I said, "How did you even, how did you meet Taj and get into the gig? Get the gig like this?" He said, "You just hang out." Not that I remember the word for word.
Right.
The point is, that was, and I looked at that and I go, "Wow, I got to play here someday." Of course, I did. So, back to the story, and let's finish the story.
Sure.
Just give the details. So I met Paul. Paul introduced me to Don and Larry Taylor. So we started practicing. We did some things, and then we did a couple of gigs. We worked at the Troubadour and a couple of other places. Paul knew people who would book the gigs, and he knew everybody anyway. So we were playing those jobs, and they were okay paid. They weren't the $5 a night jobs, and they were pretty well received. And then Larry goes, "Man, this ain't it. It's jazz." He didn't say that, but Larry's like that. He goes, "That is, man."
I love it. I love it.
Larry's great. So he wanted to do something else, so he left. I brought in a friend of mine that I was playing with up in Fresno named Victor Conti.
Yes, Conti.
Victor became famous for a couple of other things.
Barry Bonds, right?
Power.
Barry Bonds?
Yeah, Barry Bonds, but he also played for Tower of Power. Victor is a great, great bass player.
No.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet that if he hadn't touched his bass in 10 years, he could pick it up and be as funky as anybody on the planet right now. But anyway.
Victor, I want to just... we can put a bow on this story, but there's a couple things. I mean, it's like... You guys were you guys were street scholars. To me, it's like, there are cats out there. I just love the guys. I'm not saying, listen, my daughter's she's a young piano player. I want her to practice. Practice is important. But it's like, you have this innate gift, and when you fuse it all together, you get jazz. You get music. I mean, to me, it's like that.
The other thing is, you put your finger on it right there. Because the other thing is ensemble playing. In other words, jazz, and by the way, bad jazz is when people are just playing real hard, or, Lagos used to call it bar mitzvah jazz, by the way. Which is a good term.
I love this guy. Rest in peace, man. No, and you're telling me, because the Troubadour was generally considered more like I remember, Mwadishi, the Herbie band, that they went there, and they bombed there because it was essentially a folk club. But you're telling me you're electric.
Right. The Troubadour started out more acoustic.
Yes.
In fact, the name kind of reveals that. But they did go to electric, and I can't remember back then, but I think we had an okay response. And we played at clubs like that. We didn't play at the Whiskey with that band, I don't think, but we did play at a couple other places like that. And by the way, in those days, there was music. Think about that for a second. There is not that much live music around at this point in
Absolutely
time.
Right.
And
Absolutely
also,
right.
And also people, and I mean, we can lament that, but whatever. It's the question of demand and a lot of other things. But the point is that nowadays, the other element of this is that even regardless of the type of music you're talking about, people kind of expect a show, because now that there's so much offer on cable and concerts are huge and live, the magic of ensemble playing that we're talking about really, which is people who can play, even if they're just playing chords behind somebody else, even when it's a singer, it could be smoking, if it's ensemble playing, if people are listening to each other. And it's true that the biggest difference we're talking about here, we practice, by the way, a lot of us, when we're the younger guys like me and Victor, we practice for hours. So it's not a question of practicing, but what it is a question of is hearing the other person and getting off on being behind. Like, you don't have to take a solo to get off. You don't have to take a solo to get off. It's not like watching, not like a porn movie where you're either there, one of the people, or you're not. That's absolutely not the case.
Right.
Because you're part of it. You're a part of it. It's different. In other words, if you're shooting a movie and there's two people interacting, and it could be porn, the point is that the crew around it, they're making the movie, but they're not a part of it in the same way that if you're playing rhythm guitar behind sugarcane is a part of it. And the other element of what we were doing was also that, and Paul was responsible for this, Paul knew so much. But what's the language restriction in this? Does one express oneself normally, or do we have to be careful?
You just go wide open. No, we go whatever you want.
We can say certain words that the FCC.
You were there, and you're being. I'm locked in. So just keep going, man.
All right. So now I'm just going to say that. Paul had amazing grasp of all of this stuff, and he was the one. He used to study Joseph Schillinger, these compositional things, and we all took a lot out of that. And one of the things that's brilliant, and you'll see this on most bands that are produced correctly, with gifted people behind them, artistic directors. Paul's thing was they would do a duet with violin, because Paul played his ass off, okay? That's obvious. And Paul and Don would go off on these flights, duet flights.
God.
You can hear that on the recordings, but we did that all the time. And sometimes that shit would last like 15 minutes. And so there'd be like the intro to the song. Don would sing a couple of verses. He'd take a solo. He'd sing another verse, and then he and Paul the bass player and I would stop, and he and Paul would play for like 15 minutes, and it'd be like these, like Pharaoh songs or other jazz. So that was definitely jazz. I mean, there's just zero question. It was jazz.
Where are the tapes of this stuff? I need tapes of that, because I think almost like the albums were.
I have a few. There's a few things up. And he. And then we would come back in, and this stuff wasn't rehearsed, as you said. So when we came back in, it was like knowing when to come back in. Okay, and we never. This isn't to say that Victor and I were so brilliant that we always came in at the right time. There was no right time, and no one ever said, "Man, you cats should have come in later or earlier," because there was no later or earlier. It was so obvious from the ensemble playing that we were doing that this is the time. I mean, they would come down to a certain level, and that's called music. And this is something that you have a little difficulty finding today. When I play with new guys, if they're playing and I'm the one leading, I hate that. But if I do it, it's very hard to say when they go, "Well, what should I do here?" I go, I'm not used to telling people what to do. You have to do what you hear. And the problem is that a lot of people don't hear that well.
Why is that? Why is that?
We got to get out of the historical story. I'll make it short.
No. This is good. Hold on. Why?
Yeah.
Why are younger cats, or why do we have a harder time hearing? This is one of the cruxes of my show.
Well, I don't know. Let me think about that.
Okay, you go back to the history. Go back to the history.
The people, first of all, I live in Europe, okay?
Yep.
And here it's a little bit different in that there isn't this huge culture. There are exceptionally talented jazz musicians here, okay? Exceptional. As good as anyone in the United States. But there's this culture that a lot of music is very superficial in that, and this is true in every country, not just Europe. But also in the United States. There's this thing, I'm not sure it's age-specific, though. I think it's that there's this culture that music is now everywhere, and music stores are everywhere, and a lot of people can afford to buy a guitar or a piano or whatever. So you start playing, but you learn by, like I did, by listening to Hendrix, and you start reproducing those riffs. But very quickly, I wanted to play my own thing and listen to other stuff and do other things. A lot of people are limited to pretty much just learning licks, and I think that's the biggest problem. Is that they learn riffs and they learn songs. So the problem there is that the song. I'm not playing songs. What can I tell you?
No, I want to tell you something.
Music, not songs. Okay.
We
do play songs, but there's the songs are supposed to be music. They're not supposed to be this note goes here and this note goes here.
You mentioned something earlier about Jesse Ed Davis. How did he get the gig with Taj? It was called accessibility. You have huge entourages now. People have sort of inflated the concept of the superhuman as it relates to the musician, and I just think that the lack of the ability for ensembles to consistently play in live venues. We can get into this later, but you go across the board, the Jerry Hahn Brotherhood with Mike Finnegan and George Marsh and those cats. They would wind up playing for a 2-week engagement somewhere. Some bands would go on the road for 3 weeks. After a while, you're with these cats. You are listening to what they're playing, and you're all just one big family. Nowadays, people are sitting around in their room. The ego, to me, in some ways, guys like Elvin Jones would be turning over in their graves to a degree. The ego has superseded the music, and to me,
I have a really good example of that not being the case. Exception to that is Derek Truck. Derek Truck is a mother on the guitar.
That's true.
If anybody doesn't know him, he's played jazz. He plays incredible, mind-blowing jazz guitar in a very original way. But he also plays like blues and funk rock kind of. I don't even know how to explain what.
No. I'm not. I just the value of the accompanist, the value of it's a values thing. The values of the accompanist.
Right.
Was at a.
But those guys are a family. That's what I was trying to point out because you mentioned this. So the Derek's band, and forgive me that I can't remember the name of it, but he's playing with, I think it may even be his wife.
Yeah, no, Tedeschi, right?
Patty, what's her name?
Susan Tedeschi? Trucks Tedeschi?
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's, I think they're a thing, they're a couple, right? I think.
Absolutely.
But I do know that what's important is that they're like a family. And it's funny because they allow people to put out their live, when they do concerts, as far as I know, they have never told anybody. People record on the sound system. All the engineers do that all the time, and they just keep it. And if they think they can get away with it, they'll put it out. These guys, they're going, "Hey, put it out. We're behind it. Go ahead."
Exactly. Well, no, it was like Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead. He said, "Once the notes leave my guitar, it's of little significance to me, so people can tape it." And so
exactly.
But if you could talk about Lagos and Conti, your brother, in the sense of where did the security come insofar as the ability to share information, not being so guarded, willing to play things even if you weren't getting paid? It was sort of like this. It was again. How did you guys? Manage the egos so well as all these cats did, whether it was Jimmy Lunsford or Woody Herman. I'm looking for love, man, and I'm just trying to figure out why why you guys were how did you come up with that? How did you have that? Because it's not part of the issue today. You talk about all these guys with incredible chops, amazing jazz musicians, but maybe not willing to give of themselves, or they have a certain concept of who they are and the kind of show they want to play, and they're not willing to go and do this or that. To me, it's a little bit more callous. Where did you guys come up with?
I can give you a couple more exceptions to that.
Good.
It is true that there's a lot of weird, callous, business, and hey, life is tough. You got to make money as well.
Right.
But there's two things I would like to say about that. First of all, another brilliant slide guitar player, Sonny Rollins. I love what he does. I just think it's so genuine and so unpretentious. And I saw his band, and they do that. It's hard to fake, having a good time with a band, because you're giving each other mean looks and stuff. If you're not having a good time, you can tell. And I've been in bands where I wasn't enjoying it. And believe me, everybody knew, the audience knew, the guys knew, and then I was either fired or quit soon after.
Right.
But Sonny Rollins, I saw Sonny Rollins in Paris at a club that was so crowded, a big club, but it was so crowded that there was no cover charge, and we never got served. Nobody ever came up and asked us what we wanted. So I saw a world-class show, and his band was playing and singing together. It's kind of a New Orleans, Cajun-y kind of thing.
Yeah.
He's got an accordion player. So it's brilliant. But the guy is one of the best guitar players in the world, as far as I'm concerned. He and Derek Truck are two names that aren't household names. But if you talk to any guitar player, I would say he or she probably knows those names. Anyway, the other one is a legendary jazz guitarist by the name of Ted Green, who wrote a book called he wrote several books, but his first book was called Chord Chemistry. If there's anybody who plays guitar and would like to learn the neck, you buy that book. It's still out. Ted died several years ago. I took one lesson with him. You had to get on a waiting list.
Ah.
The guy was totally zero ego, and he was probably, in what he did, he was like Bill Evans on the guitar. He had his harmonic concept was so amazing that no one could listen to it and just not be completely blown away. Anybody on the guitar, anyway. And Ted was he was just this totally amazing guy. I mean, that had zero ego. He mentioned me in an interview he did a little bit before he passed away, even. And it wasn't anything he's great or anything like that. That's not the point. But the fact that he mentioned people like me because we met is amazing to me right there. I mean, there was no real gain in that. He loved to share. He wrote a bunch of books. I recommend that guitar players.
Well, because you're highlighting. I mean, Jim Huart, great bass player from Southern California, he was in the Army, and when Ray Brown was with Ella Fitzgerald, and he was ready to move on, and he called Jim and said, hey, or he recommended him for the gig. It's the idea of links in the chain. All right, yeah. Randy, it's like you guys to me are, thank God for modern medicine and for just, healthy lifestyles, because so many cats, you guys have to be the links in the chain as far as a values concept. And I think one of them has to do with the fact that there wasn't all this adulation. I don't think you even realized if you played a great gig, if it was a great gig, you weren't necessarily even aware of that, and you didn't really care about it. Whereas today, you get a lot of cats, musicians who just will perseverate. They'll hear something, they'll want to listen to it over and over and over again, as opposed to just sort of moving on and not getting so amazed with what they are doing, as opposed to the group concept. To me, it's the sharing component of it. That band that you guys had, I mean, you look at the back of the covers of some of that stuff. I mean, there's special guests with masking tape over their eyes. I mean, it's the whole thing is great. To me, Lagos has been, in my soul from the beginning, because the guy just played he'd go across the board. He could play every type of idiom, which is why idioms weren't even used. It was just jack of all trades, like Hal Blaine or Keltner or any of those cats, And it's just, you guys were just in that, and bless you for being that. But you say today, as a leader, you still have a hard time giving directions, because that's just not the way you grew up.
Well, and I didn't have. Yeah, well, it's hard to give directions, not only because I didn't have experience at it, but also because I don't feel that I'm as good at it as Paul was in that context. And Paul, for example, getting back to yet again to the story of the formation of the Preheat and Drug Act, it was called the Sugarcane Harris Group in those days. Okay, that was the four of us with Don, Paul, Victor Conti after Larry left, and myself. And at that point, Paul put the repertoire together. So Paul, because Don was the leader, ostensibly, but the fact is, Don just showed up and played. He had no real. Then later on, he would get, I want to play this. But basically, Paul goes, "What do you got that's kind of New Orleans beat?" And he had "Do It Yourself," which was a thing he learned. I think Shuggy Otis wrote that, or one of the Johnny Otis wrote it. And then he had something else. I don't know. A couple of the tunes. They took a tune. They took an inspiration from the John Mayall gig that they played on. But it's important to say that we played a couple of gigs, and then Harvey joined the band, partially because it was more attractive to record labels when we got on Epic. But also Harvey had a sound, and he had played with those guys, and so he started playing with the band. And then what happened was then we composed songs together, and one of those songs was based on a Mayall thing. Not stolen from, just a feel. They go, yeah, I like that shuffle that we were doing with John. Let's do that. But Paul was always like, let's do this. Let's do, what do you got this? And then Harvey came up, and I got to give it to him because this was the most requested song we ever played. Harvey came up with a riff that just happened to be in an extremely odd time signature, one that I've never heard anybody else use. It's in 10/4.
Wow.
So,
wow.
And that's My Soul's on Fire. And I don't know, Harvey came up with the riff, and Don just yelled, My Soul's on Fire. And that became, first of all, not only was it the most requested song at our gigs and on the album, from the album and all that, but it was also, people got up and danced to it, because they danced to it as if it was in 2/4 with 5 measures. So they didn't count, as long as you don't count the measures, you hear this beat.
Wow.
That worked.
I got it. Pure Food and Drug Act. Thank you for reminding me. I was going with Prime Choice Cuts. It was.
That's the name of the album, was Choice Cuts.
I love. What is that? A picture of a woman's leg or something? I don't even know what's on that.
Well, let's talk about politically incorrect. This was the 70s, 1972. So that was Skip Taylor, the manager. What he did is, he claims, and I don't know if this is even true or not, but he claims it was his daughter's behind.
Oh, dear.
It's
dear.
Plank, right?
Dear.
Well, he says it's his... No, I mean, there's nothing sexual about it. It's just a...
No, I did. I mean, it was the 70s, and I was born in 78. I'm longing for this. That's authenticity. You open the cover of that, you guys look, I mean, there's just plumes of smoke.
Well, that's somebody's ass when they're bending over. And I still don't know to this day, because I never really went that close, and it's hard to tell. He claims it's his daughter, and there's a picture of his daughter. God, I bet she's embarrassed today. Just being on that album. It's pretty funny. She was what? She was about 5 or something, maybe not even at that time, and that's what, 40-some years ago, right?
I mean, I see that album today. I probably have 5 copies of that album. I love it so much, and because you guys are just locked in. I will be honest, though. I would love to hear, are there anything available with just Resnick as a lead guitar? Sometimes Mandel gets me a little...
Yeah.
He kind of floats away, and I would rather just hear the quartet, the original quartet.
Yeah, I have... Well, there's not much of that. There's a few live gigs recorded on an old Walkman.
Oh, that's just fine with me. I still got an analog cassette deck in my car.
Some of that, I mean, there is some of that online. I'll have to tell you that.
Tell me, so essentially, Mandel comes up.
But I also, in 1995, I did record what then was a CD, and now it's all online, so you can find that.
Well, you'll point me in those.
People can find my music on SoundCloud just by going to SoundCloud.com. I mean, there's a lot of everything, so it could be, I don't know what it is that they're going to fall on, but some of my CDs on there, and also some of my recent activities on the upright bass. It's SoundCloud Facebook.com/Randulo, RANDULO. And I recorded a bunch of stuff in the 90s, 92, 93, and the CD came out in 95. A lot of the CD is on that SoundCloud.
How do you, I was going to talk to you about the European scene. It seems to me like the appreciation for the musician as not just an artist, but also as a job seems to be more in sync there, as opposed to now where you have, in this country, you have people in the States that are paying to play. I just wasn't sure if that was accurate. Do you feel like the artist is given its due and your craft is accepted more in Europe?
I don't think so, no. I think that there was a big advance at one period in time. First of all, there was a time when black jazz musicians could come to Paris or come to Europe and be much more appreciated.
Sure.
Luther Allison was huge in France, by the way.
Really?
He's a Chicago blues guy. Yeah. Well, Jerry Lewis too.
Well, I was thinking more like Art Farmer and Johnny Griffin, those guys, the jazzers, Art Farmer, like those guys.
Yeah. Well, there was the famous drummer. I can't remember which one came and lived here, and he told his friends. I remember this was in like maybe Bird Lives or one of those books.
Right.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of people who did come, but that had more to do with the acceptance of mixed couples and black people at the time. They're catching up a little with that, the whole, not racist, but there's a whole other thing happening here now that was absolutely not happening at the time. In other words, when the United States in the 60s, when people were getting, big time, and there was still pretty much segregation in the South, and jazz musicians, people who you and I and many other fans would respect as geniuses,
yes,
not to mention okay human beings, were treated like shit in the United States in every possible way in their daily lives, but also by club owners, by the way, I never did finish another...
This is just part one. I mean, this is just part one, right? I mean, the idea that...
Wait a second.
Yeah.
When I remembered Spiritual, when I mentioned that Spiritual by John Coltrane...
Oh, yeah, you didn't finish that. That's right. Yeah.
Hold on. Live at the Village Vanguard. He recorded a lot of albums there. And at the end, so they play this 15-minute tune. It's beautiful. It's called Spiritual. It's apparently inspired by a spiritual. So there's this voice, haunting stuff. Then the church bells, McCoy Tyner. Then it comes back, and he plays tenor in the beginning, and he plays soprano at the end. And he recorded some stuff with Eric Dolphy. And at the very end, they hit this long note. And then there's 4 people clapping. 2 of them were hookers, and the other 2 junkies in the Village Vanguard, because there was nobody there. That's the way the Village Vanguard operated. There was no big crowds. So I'm just saying that in those days, when Train came over to Europe, he was playing to audiences the side, and there's some very famous bootleg recordings, by the way, that are just beautiful. In those 60s tours that those guys did in Europe, they would play in theaters, packed, So there was a lot more respect in the 60s. Now, we're all over the world, thanks to the internet and radio, and everything that spreads culture instantly. And I love it. It has its great aspects, but because of that, also, everything is a show now, so everything's got to be, the level of Madonna and Justin Bieber, not forgetting the references to anybody's talent, just the size of these productions. And even on Herbie Hancock, because Victor Conti, who played with us, played with Tower of Power, and then he also played in the Herbie Hancock Monster Band.
Wow. I don't know that.
And in that band, Herbie, who needs no introduction to anybody who knows anything about music, he's one of the pillars of the whole thing. He's the younger generation than Miles, but still, amazing guy. And he was playing his funk thing, the Monster Band, and I was at one of their rehearsals, and their producer said, he stopped them in the middle and said, no, Herbie, you got to come on stage from the right. Because when you come out from the left, you cross this. So what I'm saying is they were already back then.
Yeah.
And that was in the mid-'70s. It was already, and I mean, that's not necessarily wrong, by the way.
No, just finish your, what were you saying?
He deserves to be perceived as a huge thing. So, but I'm just saying that they already had to do that. And say Sonny Landreth, who I saw much later, in Paris, his band just stood there and played, and they were great, and people absolutely were under the spell, and there was no, come in, now you're going to come in from the left, then you're going to, like, fake, nodding to me.
Yeah, no, it was all
like the Oscars.
Right.
Like the Oscars, where there's this fucking show that I never watch, by the way, because everything contrived comes to mind as a word.
Mm-hmm.
I hate stuff that's contrived because it doesn't mix with the music. It might be cute on TV, but it doesn't mix with the music. Music is music. And by the way, music, somebody, was telling me, I was at a concert once, I was listening to this band, and I was behind a pillar. I had a bad seat. And the guy came over and said, "Oh, hey, here, come over here where you see better." I said, "I don't need to see. I'm listening."
Right. Well, you talk about the other contrived or choreographed as opposed to spontaneity. Spontaneity has been all but washed away. Whereas in the
exactly.
pure Food and Drug Act, that's all it was. So
for better or worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
you were seeing something. Let me. By the way, let me quote. I think it was Nat Hentoff.
Yes.
Again, it's a Coltrane reference. But he wrote on one of Train's albums, because it was a live album, he goes, and so, that night I saw something that you rarely get a chance to see, a man going for broke. You're not going, these guys, Rod Stewart, bless him, bless his heart, whatever, but stuff like that, I mean, those people are not going for broke on stage because they've been rehearsing this shit for 6 months. And they hired all the best cats that they could find that can read music and stuff. That's fine. That's great. But that is not the same thing at all.
I'm glad you brought up Hentoff. I interviewed him a couple times, and he said here, I'm reading here, "I used to know John Coltrane very well. He had the sense that his music and everything he was doing was a world music. He was in a world consciousness. He would listen for hours. Not just to Indian music. He was listening to African tribal music way back when it was recorded. My oldest friend in music, Charles Mingus, never used the word jazz. He said, I play Mingus music. Duke Ellington, who I got to know when I was quite young and was my mentor, never used the word jazz. He didn't like terminology. I mean, we are so terminology-based and so much more verbally based now. Someone gets in front of an obstructed pole, they're throwing their calamari across the table. You're like, I don't need to care about the pole. I just want to listen. And it's not. This is not about preservation, Randy. This is about promoting the aesthetics and the values of what made music real music, as opposed to this contrived. To me, it's like it's sad because part of me wants Herbie to throw down and say, "F this, I'm going back to a quartet playing in smoky bars." But I realize the money's too good and the fame is too good, and I wouldn't turn it down either. And that's what we've turned into is a society that is, where I agree. Money, I mean, you got to make a living. You have to figure it out, and I'm still trying to figure it out, but. That it's not the end-all, be-all, and if people think that these massive productions are somehow going to lend itself to holistic, really grooving soul music, it's pathetic. And too much of our society's been indoctrinated to that. And so I refuse. We just continue to play sugarcane, Resnick, and a lot of just psych jazz, folk jazz in my house for my daughters. Their ears are going to be wide open. There's no looking back. I just can't believe that first of all, I can't believe I didn't put it together, but the fact that you discovered me within 24 hours, and then, I'm sitting around here in my folks' house last night, and I'm trying to figure out who I can interview, and I messaged your Art Resnick. I'm like, hey, you want to do an interview? And he's like, next week's going to be better. And I just, it's the whole thing is a spiritual journey. That's what I love doing about this stuff, is that I'm just marinating in it and being able to really glean from you guys. Obviously we're hopping around, but we're all hitting on the same kinds of things. And I just think it's, talk for you being a musician, you love, despite all the warts and all the crap. Tell me some stuff that you've done lately that sort of made you believe that that the magic still exists.
Well, I know the magic still exists, but I haven't had that many chances recently. And I mean, that's because I live in a place that I like and that has nothing to do with music. It's very hard to find. I'm in a small city, Bordeaux in France, It's very hard. I've tried to find people to play with, but it's very difficult. It would be good to play with either Americans because they already know. You know what I hate, by the way, is when people, this goes back to something else we were just talking about. The question I dread the most is when people say, well, what kind of music do you play? Because if I couldn't say jazz because it really isn't jazz. It's not jazz. Like it's not jazz. It's not jazz in the sense that word would tend to mean to people, so I wouldn't use that word. But it's also, if I say blues, because it's kind of a blues rock thing, but as soon as you say blues, it's like, well, you're not black, and you're not poor. And it isn't that, because the stuff I write is from personal experience. So I'm not, if I play the so-called blues, it is never, I woke up this morning and, my wife had divorced me.
Right.
I gave you 7 children, now you want to give them back to the famous B.B. King line. Yeah, I've listened to thousands of hours of blues, and I love the blues, but I am not a blues man and never will be.
Right.
It's not even a question of race, it's a question of I did not live that life. I love that they tell those stories, but that's not me. So what I'm trying to do now with the music I've written, it's been compared a little bit. Richard Green compared it at one point to Mose Allison. He said, "Yeah, you're the Mose Allison of the guitar." And there's some truth to that because I love Mose Allison, so I'm willing to take that man along. Yeah, I like Mose a lot.
Whoa! Richard Green, the violinist.
Yeah, from C-Train. Because I played with Richard. Played at the Whiskey with Richard. And
Richard is one of my he's one of my dear friends. Richard was one of my earliest AM radio broadcasts. I can't believe I love that cat more.
Small world, man.
Man, did you know him when he took Scotty Stoneman in from the Ash Grove when the fiddle player? I mean, this guy.
No, the Ash Grove is another gig we did, by the way.
You did they brought.
Yeah, we did the Ash Grove with Larry. Yeah. Or no, the Ash Grove. Larry couldn't make the Ash Grove. We did the Ash Grove with somebody else, Putter Smith.
I see. That's what the Brotherhood. It's not a very big tribe, but the tribe gleans itself, like you said, from guys that like yourself, who you took aspects of the blues and you took aspects of gospel and jazz and rock and you sprinkled it into your music. Richard's another example of that. Putter's another example of that, where nowadays this is the other part of it, is that you have these academic institutions. People are learning, there are books written about people's styles, and kids are only learning to cop those styles, where it's like, well, what are you talking about? What about, when I interviewed Cosby's like, yeah, I could put a blindfold on, you could put a record on, I wouldn't even be able to look at the record, I could tell you which drummer it was, because everybody had their own style. But nowadays, it's just about conformity, and it's about, really just tucking it into a nice 6-minute jam, pacification, no type of raw or sort of experimental stuff. If you do that, it gets vilified because it's not linear. And to me, I see this very clearly as a younger cat. I'm thrashing around in it, and I say, well, where can I get truth from? Well, it's not going to be from politicians or lawyers. I'm going to have to reach out to these cats who are totally loose. To me, it's absolutely essential. And like you said, it's. I'm curious though, going back when you talk about some of these guys who were heralded, treated like with the respect that they deserved in Europe. Talk about all those guys that went over there, Luther Allison, or just all these jazz guys. Nowadays, because of interconnection, you believe it's not the same as it was before. I'm just trying to figure out why the appreciation has lessened in Europe for improvisational music.
Well, I don't know. I can't give any facts or statistics, but live music in general has gone way down.
Right.
So, what you've got is, well, by the way, and this is worldwide, a DJ who makes more than the band. So people hire DJs. When they have parties, they hire DJs, or there's DJs in clubs. And this is what the people want. I can't put that down. If this is what the people want, fine. Rap music has become big, and rap isn't, I guess people do play it live. I've never been to one, but I don't think there's actual clubs that do that. There's just, it's very rare. Here in France, there's some support of the culture from like associations that get funds from Europe or from the country. So they do concerts maybe once a week or twice a week. As far as private stuff, I mean, it's really rough out there. Clubs, it's not pay to play, but it's, and we got that at the end of my career in California. I remember a guy telling us, well, there was nobody there, so I'm going to have to charge you, $400 for the rental of the sound system or something. That was in California.
Oh my gosh!
That was the beginning of the end. But basically, what most people do now, and I think it's probably still the same in California, is you rent the room. You don't rent the room, but you are in charge of bringing people. You take the money if there's a cover. We're talking about like bars. Then the bar gets the bar, of course, and then they get a percentage of the entrance fee, the cover. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it, but that's okay if you have a following. So you got to be really canny about bringing people in. And of course, the kind of music I play, that's probably not going to happen. The last time I played, by the way, I didn't have anything to do with the money part because I took it for the money. In fact, I didn't take the money. I told the guy to give it to the guy who needed it the most because he's having all his shit possessed. But I think we made $6 for 3 people, something like that. Fine, I didn't take the money, and I think he gave most of it. One guy got it, so well, we had fun. We played 2 sets, and that was great. I enjoyed that. We had to rehearse 1,000 times more than the Pure Food and Drug Act ever rehearsed. But then again, it was fun because I loved these guys, and it wasn't a huge deal. We weren't paying for a studio or anything. I've been in a situation in Paris where when I went through a bunch of bass players, and I had this drummer, and she said, I don't play. She's a woman drummer, very dear friend and very good drummer. And she said, this guy's an American, and he came in. He's wasting time. You were renting the studio for a gig that pays crap. And there was a studio rental, and he's going, let me eat my sandwich. He comes late, and he's eating a sandwich. And, while the meter's broke.
No.
So that kind of thing is just not acceptable. And he was okay. He wasn't the most brilliant bass player by far that I've ever played with, having played with Larry and all that. Well, after we get to the canned heat story, though, you asked me about the recent gigs, and
yeah, go ahead.
I received a phone call at 2 in the afternoon in October of 2012. So it's about a year and a half ago, I guess. And it's Vito from Canned Heat.
Wow.
Vito, who played with Larry and Harvey Mandel, and I don't know who else at Woodstock, 1969. So Vito, yeah, man, we're in trouble here. We need a guitar player. Harvey had to go home. So Harvey's playing. Harvey, the 3 of them are playing. It's in the contract that the 3 have to play, 3 original members, and they have to play a certain time. And I think that time might have been 45 minutes. I don't know, whatever. There was some time in the minutes in the contract. So first of all, I know a lot of blues, but I don't know all their tunes. I've never played On the Road Again or any of that, but I mean, it's pretty simple stuff. So I listen. He says, "Can you come down and play at least for tonight, if nothing else?" Yeah. So I got on the train, get there at 6 o'clock for the gig starting at about 8. And
what was going through your head though? What at that time? That must have been pretty crazy.
Well, it's funny because the other part of this equation is I've been playing bass, upright bass at home alone for 2 years. Beautiful work.
Just like Putter Smith.
Yeah, so I haven't touched anything for 2 years. But, so I'm on YouTube and I got the tunes that I knew they were going to be playing. And they do play some pretty standard blues, but they also play their songs that people want to hear, like On the Road Again, stuff like that. I'm growing up country. I don't understand why, but that song is in every ad that's ever gone on French TV.
Right.
They must have made zillion. Whoever wrote that, I guess Al Wilson probably wrote it, and he's been dead for a long time. Anyway, they're playing that, and they're playing the boogie, and so on.
Sure.
And so what was going through my head, and I have to admit, I was dubious. I was doubtful that I was. I didn't think it was going to be fabulous. That's for sure. But he said, "Hey, we can trust you. Come on down." So I went down there. We rehearsed a little bit. And we did a couple of minutes of one of my tunes that we couldn't do live because they didn't want, that wasn't why they were there. But I'll tell you one thing, these guys could play, and I can't remember the harmonicas. Yeah, but Dale plays with them right now. He's a real good harmonica player. He's singing, plays guitar. Plus, all these guys except Vito play guitar, bass, harmonica, sing, and all that. Larry plays real good guitar, slide guitar especially. So anyway, but when we got on the stage, whatever I did was certainly good enough, and it was assured enough. And I was amazed to find that I was not like scared or nervous. And I had like very, very little chops, but we played and people loved it, and I got some applause in the solos and stuff. But I played 2 nights with them, and after the first night, or was it the second night? We were talking to Vito. It's about midnight. He says, "Are you going to be able to do the other gigs?" I said, I had a prior commitment, but between you and me, so I couldn't. I had to go home, so they got somebody else to come in town to replace Harvey for the rest of the tour. There were 10 or 12 other nights. By the way, this paid very well.
I'm sure it did.
In the terms of what one is accustomed to.
Yeah, this is 2012.
This wasn't. This was not $60 for the 3 of us.
Right.
This was somewhere around $300 a man, and to play for an hour. Under a situation where people really like you and people are trying to get into the dressing room to talk to you and stuff, that's kind of the adulation element. You can't play that down. You shouldn't let that go to your head, but I mean, it's agreeable, especially since somebody I know was there and came in and I didn't expect him. That's really funny. But anyway, and it's good for the for the record, and you say that I'm still alive and still playing. But what's really funny is that these guys haven't changed in all these years. So how many years is this from 1969? 45 years, right?
Yes.
Something like that?
Yes.
The guys have not changed. They still have the same arguments. They still are yelling at each other. I mean, I think they love each other. Like I said, it's like
sure. Well, that's love. Yeah, right. Of course.
But I mean, they're still arguing about who has the better hotel room. Get over yourself, man.
Well, it's funny is that they.
It was still fun to be.
Yeah.
It was still fun to be in the van, so we went from one city to the next, and they're in the van, and they were really thrilled because I had a Wi-Fi hotspot for them, so they were on checking their email and stuff because they couldn't roam. But anyway, so it went well. It was a lot of fun, but like I said, not only could I not do it because I had a commitment on Saturday, but also, between you and me, I would have gone nuts playing that music for 12 more days.
That's right.
Absolute basket case. Couldn't have done it.
Well, you just wanted to get back to playing your upright bass, too.
Well, there was that, although I'm playing more guitar now. But but I enjoyed that. That opened my eyes to the fact that I can still play guitar, because I hadn't for a long time. And you don't really forget. It's great. I've stopped many times from playing. In fact, I didn't touch an instrument for about 6 years, several years ago. And you come back, and as someone who can express themselves through an instrument, the only difference is you have a little less chops. You can't do any of the fireworks maybe that you could do if you're well practiced and all that. But facility, as you've said several times, is not all it's cracked up. It's not the important thing. The important thing is telling a story. And what's funny about telling a story is now they've taken that mantle, that idea, mantra of telling a story. Now it's in marketing. Everything you hear now is, but you got to have a story to tell.
Well, but it's also the thing about what you're talking about. People tell stories now, and they're manufactured by
exactly.
They're not. A lot of times, the coolest stories are the ones that are made up on the spot. That doesn't happen anymore because we're going to do another hour on Lagos, just by your relationship with him and what a genius he was. But I do want to ask you.
I'd like to.
You and Art, very very bright guys. What were your folks into? What were they? Very intellectual people, very bright guys. People. Your mom and dad.
Yes and no. And we grew up in different environments, too, because our parents divorced.
Oh.
And so I lived with the stepfather it was totally different. But what's funny is no one had any musical inclination.
Really?
At all. Although we had an uncle who did one-man band and stand-up comic. That's not true. He did play, and he did have that. So if there's any genes involved, that would have been him. But in the family, for example, neither of the families listened to music, for example. They knew nothing, zero. And Art and I used to make fun of our dad because he was just so tone deaf and so horrible about it.
Wow, that's incredible.
Art was the one that, and Art helped me because he was, he's older than I am, and he was already into music, including jazz, but also he played with the people in Minneapolis. He played with a lot of different people. And he played with a lot of famous people in the jazz world, by the way.
Yo, I want to tell you, I have the most obscure albums with him on, and I'm like, where is this cat, Art Resnick? I didn't even know. Then I found him on Facebook. I freaked out because I love his sound. I love his piano playing.
He played with Cannonball. He played with Freddie Hubbard.
No, the most inside straight album he was on. It was Bobby Shoe album with Sherman Ferguson on drums. Ridiculous.
Yep, he played with Bobby Shoe. And he also had a monster band of his own with Rufus Reed. I know you know him.
Oh my God.
And I'm trying to remember. I think the drummer was maybe Billy. No, the drummer was another famous.
Was it Billy Hart?
Rufus Reed and who? He had a band in New York at the time. I can't remember the drummer's name now.
Can you talk? I don't want to gloss over this either because I love Richard so much. How did you and Green, C-Train, and were you guys on the same bill?
That was a band. No, that was a band. That was probably another thing that Paul hooked up actually because after Sugarcane thing kind of. I don't even know what happened. For some reason, we weren't playing anymore.
Yeah, he was probably in the cage with the Manipulatives at that point.
He may have. Well, no, but see, Sugarcane may have gone to jail. I honestly don't remember what happened because we were still friends and still playing with Don when I left the country. There's a couple of other stories on that, but as I mentioned to you, the last time I saw Don and the last time Paul and I played is that gig in Altadena or someplace. No, I can't remember the name of the city, near Pasadena in California, at the Raven and the Rose. And there's a couple of photos from there on that site. In fact,
what site?
Sugarcane-harris.com.
Oh my gosh! I gotta get. Oh, this is unbelievable. So the
and another guy, by the way, that's interesting is Dewey Terry, Don's old partner when he was Don and Dewey. And we used to hang out a lot with Dewey, and I saw Dewey a couple of years before he passed away and was talking to him.
That's fascinating.
Because those guys, when they wrote something like "I'm leaving it up to you" and got $25 in 1945 or whatever, and then that's it. That's one of those things. And I asked Dewey, I said, "Well, did you guys ever speak to an attorney back in the day and stuff?" And he says, "Yeah." He said, "There's really not much can be done. I mean, the legal cost of something like that to get anything out of it, and yet that's one of the most played songs in the world, And I mean, they really pretty much got screwed out of the royalties of that, like a lot of people back in those days. Dare I say, by the way, a lot of black people, basically.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, Big Black told me last. I mean, he just rants and raves about the idea. He said if Dizzy was a white person, he'd have more money than in a house. And
God.
Yeah, and so I mean, part of my discovery. Listen, John Hendricks. I just did an interview with him, and he's talking about the influence of the mob on his career and how they didn't treat the Sicilians didn't treat them like niggers. He said, I want to rip the scabs off of our history a little bit so that people understand that that things existed before Sex in the City. I mean, this is a little bit ridiculous, and talking to guys like, I mean, I would not have predicted before the week started that I would have been connecting with Randy Resnick in Bordeaux. I mean, it just would not have been on the radar, but it's another link in the chain. And, I'm going to have to go back and listen to this. I will chronicle. I think we tied the knot on a couple of stories. We'll finish some more in the next part, and we'll do a whole lot of time on Lagos. I'll let you just rant on that for a while.
Yeah, Lagos is great. He's a good subject because somebody should do a biography of him.
Oh, I'm going to know. Listen, the other drummer that I've chronicled, you probably don't know him, but he's another guy. No Wikipedia page. He's a guy named Sunship Woody Theus. He's an incredible drummer. And I have devoted a lot of time to him. Lagos, to me, I'm blown away. He doesn't have a Wikipedia page. I'll take that mantle, and we'll start with the next interview. And Randy, man, really, man, it's so great to rap with you, man. Really, really good time.
My pleasure. I sent you some links. There's a link to a site about Paul, and I'll send this again because it's a memorial site. So his daughter and a bunch of other friends and stuff. There's a lot of information about him that I didn't know. It was not just me posting a blog post. It was a site where people wrote in their experiences and their memoirs of Paul.
I think the best thing that we can do. Yeah, no, the best thing that we can do right now is get as many master musicians on the record to talk about Lagos, and we'll start with But I mean, this guy. He's my brother. Art lived with Lagos like I did. He lived with Lagos in another period, and he can confirm the part about Lagos. Because Art was the one who told me. He said, Paul will go set his drums, and just play for free any place. He did that all the time. Bar mitzvah jazz. Bar mitzvah jazz. That's the greatest line of all time. Yeah, that's his. Well, he was a little dismissive there, but mostly true, I guess. All right, I got to go back to being a father, Randy. We'll talk soon. All right. All right. Good to hear you. Okay. See you later. Take care. All right. Sorry about the sound. Bye. No, you sound great. Peace.